Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Game Hub. I'm your host, Gamer K, and if you can't tell by my artwork around here, it is finally October, which means it is Villains Month, and I feel like I'm forgetting something. There we are. Now I'm all ready for Villain Month. I love this pumpkin suit. So, it's time to start off this Villain Month by kind of doing something I've been doing for a long time. I did my favorite anime villains. I did my favorite Disney and Pixar villains. I did my favorite cartoon villains. I did my favorite live action villains from movies and TV. And now I'm going to be doing something a little bit on the different side as I go through. Disney isn't the only company who can do really great villains. And it is a testament to how so many of them, some people either forget or some of them are still in our memories even to this day. So I'm going to be going over my top 13 non-Disney animated villains. And making this list was not easy considering there are so many other non-Disney movies, and I think there was definitely more than 13, but I had to limit to my list. So obviously, if there's more than one movie series, like if some of these had a sequel, then only one per sequel, one per series, one per franchise, one per series. Only movies I've seen. I always make that a rule. And also, there's one on here that is technically owned by Disney now, but I'm still counting it because when it was created, it wasn't a Disney property. So I'm keeping that rule. So let's begin Villain Month by going over the villains that gave the mouse a run for his money. And why top 13 as always? Because here on the Game Hub, only the odd can be number one. Growing up in the late 90s, it was definitely something because there was so many original ideas for movies, and who would have thought if you took this, threw in a bit of this, and included this? Who knew that would be such a great movie? I am talking about some of the funniest villains I've seen, like when I was a kid, and I still get a laugh from them nowadays. Mr. Swackhammer and the Monstars from Space Jam. They are on the list because they are like one of the few villains that are funny, entertaining, and made a geeky kid like me actually like basketball a little bit. I mean, as I've grown up, I kind of like sports a little bit more, but this is basically what cemented me to liking a sports movie. And yeah, having the Looney Tunes in it was an added plus. Like, the Monstars were just so hilarious, and I like how even though they were their own individual colors, even their monster forms had their own uniqueness about them that differentiated them. And I really, really like that. It's something so interesting, and yeah, their whole plan is to basically have the Looney Tunes become their attractions on their planet, Moron Mountain, which is basically a theme park. Actually, now that I think about it, this is exactly what would happen if Mr. Burns bought a planet and made a corporate theme park. You know what? Let's not think about that, because most likely that was either an episode or is going to be an episode. Just going to make a joke about that. Mr. Swackhammer especially, being voiced by Danny DeVito. I swear to God, anytime DeVito does a character in animation, it always gets a good laugh out of me. And he's always a short guy, so I do love it. They're on the lower side of the list, because as much as I love the Monstars and their antics, and Mr. Swackhammer being at the beginning of the movie, and also coming in during the big game, like he doesn't have that much of a relevance to the overall story. But I still love them. They are classic, they are nostalgic, and they're fun as heck. So even though they lost the game, the Monstars are definitely in my MVP Hall of Fame. Monster valuable players. Okay. This is a story about a good-looking guy who everyone in the city or town loves. However, he has his eye on one of the most beautiful women who's in the town, who always rejects his advances. So he believes if he kills a monster that's been terrorizing the town, and he will suddenly get notoriety, and the woman will fall in love with him. Why does this sound familiar? Yeah, obviously I'm not talking about Gaston. Yeah, I know it sounded familiar, but it's not him. Okay, then what were we talking about? And this one takes place in Paris too. Huh. Symbolism. For a little bit of context, A Monster in Paris was a French animated series, movie that came to me out of nowhere years. Okay, yeah, it was developed in 2011. When was A Monster in Paris made?
A Monster in Paris was released September 10th, 2011.
Okay, then I actually got that one correct. But boy, was it fun! It was a really cool idea, and also having one of my Code Lyoko favorites, having the voice of Odd being an irritating little sniveling shit, really brought that back for me. But it's such a beautiful movie. It's such a unique idea, even though the villain is basically Gaston with a badge. I am talking about Inspector Victor Manot. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Like, this is, again, a very Gaston-ish villain. He's strong, he's popular, he's a commissioner of the French police, which makes him a little bit more dangerous, and he lusts for the gorgeous singer at a club. I can't remember her name because, again, it's been a long time since I've seen the movie. But because of the two bumbling nits in the movie who take up the majority of the first act, which makes a little bit of sense, they accidentally mix chemicals in a scientist's lab, and a flea gets into the plume of the chemicals, becomes monstrous, and surprisingly has a great singing voice. So after the sightings of the monster, the Inspector Manot decides to destroy the monster and to become famous and to get the woman the singer to fall for him. Seriously, these people, these nutcases don't think this plan through though. And I gotta be honest, even though he's not a villain throughout the majority of the movie, like we know Gaston technically is, he's still a charismatic villain. I do love that, how people believe in what he says and will do literally. People were listening to him from the get-go. It's not until later in the movie until he shows his real monstrous behavior, as he's reckless and causing destruction as he chases the monster. And unlike Gaston, he gets his real comeuppance being arrested. I mean, yeah, obviously this video is going to have spoilers, so right before the first one go in, can we put in the spoiler alert thing right at the beginning? Okay, good. Thank God for that annoying voice. He knows how to make things work. So yeah, Monster in Paris, Victor Manot, almost a Beauty and the Beast cop-out, but at the same time, it's still unique. The songs in the movie are great, and Manot, even though he's not a villain throughout the majority of the film, he's still a great villain and definitely worthy on this list. Next up. See, Disney's not the only one who can play around with history and make it interesting and a little bit better. Can we play the song? Nah, let's not. This is the one I was talking about, and we are talking about the good old Rasputin from Anastasia. Such a great villain. And also the voices of Christopher Lloyd and Jim Cummings, which makes the character so better. Having the voice come from this maniacal looking monstrous man, and just how creepy his body is. His whole plan is to get revenge on the Romanovs for not inviting him to the birthday party. Coronation. Man, a lot of people borrowed from Disney a lot back in the day. Which makes sense now because Disney has no original ideas now. Rasputin gets on this list. He's a smidge at the parts of the list that are great, but not perfect. I do love how he sends those green gargoyle demon monsters to enchant Anastasia in her dreams and to cause problems. But he suffers a problem that a lot of villains back in the day had, is that they only make their big appearance and their big stand in the last third of the movie. If we just took out Rasputin, literally nothing would change except for the train derailing and her nightmare on the boat. But again, to be fair, we wouldn't have gotten one of the greatest villain songs of all time. Again, another thing about the reason he's at number 11 and almost he's below the next villain who is a little bit better, his presence in the movie isn't as done well, and the final confrontation just seems lacking, like very lackluster. But I still love Rasputin. He was a great villain. And that's all I gotta say. In the Dark of the Night. Yeah, I got no joke here. I just wanted to say the name of one of the greatest villain songs ever. So let's get to it. Well, I think this next villain encapsulates something that one of the greatest evils to ever come in movies, and this villain definitely exaggerates one of the greatest evils to befall the world in throughout time, and especially throughout Hollywood. Child actors. I'm joking, but on the same side, this villain does this trope so well that no other movie has ever tried to do something like this. And it's from a movie that I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't remember. Cats Don't Dance. And I am talking about, oh dear God, I am talking about a character that was based on my mom's favorite, Shirley Temple. We've got Darla Dimple. Oh my God. So, for context, in the movie, Hollywood only casts animals as animal characters because, human actors are basically ruling. And Darla, being the child star that she is, obviously throughout, through the first little bit of her appearance, you can tell that she doesn't like sharing the spotlight, especially with animals. But then she plays a big musical number when she helps the main character get a whole thing together. And you are lying to yourself if you don't think Big and Loud is a great villain song. Because it is. It's a great villain song. And just the overall bombastic nature of it is basically how Darla Dimple does everything. Everything's got to be big and loud or else no one's going to hear it. And it compensates her great. until she screws over the animal actors, and then almost like not even like the next scene do we get her the reprise song where it's more menacing and freaking diabolical, where the cutesy facade that she has goes away and turns into a psychopathic child star, basically, where she plans on getting rid of the animals. Okay, Darla Dimple gets on this list and gets higher among the first 3 villains because of how perfect she is. This is a villain that encompasses basically child actors. There's the sweet, innocent side that the media and all the directors and everything know her as, and then there's the monster, the attention hungry monster that all the other cast members know her as, but they're all scared to say anything about it. And Darla definitely gets her comeuppance in the end of the movie, and it's like just watching the movie overall, seeing her plan somewhat succeed, somewhat fail, and I got nothing more to say about her. She's just a great villain that encompasses a type of villain that isn't really used a lot in media. And I think it's a shame, and it's a surprise that I can't remember who made this movie, but it's a fan favorite of mine. Take it away, Max. Okay. Once again, there's a reason I always say only the odd can be number 1 for my top 13s. Because I find the weirdest things and the most odd of media. From TV shows, to movies, to video games. And obviously, here, it's showing that I'm showing some of the most obscure villains. And here's one from Nickelodeon that surprisingly did very, very well. And again, it's another obscure one, but at the same time, no, I'm not talking about Plankton from the SpongeBob movies. No, I'm not. Yes, I know this movie came from Nickelodeon. This is why I need to update this system of what is good in... Never mind. I am talking about a movie that has one of my favorite actors and who has a villain in the movie. You know what? I'm putting both villains from the movie on this list because they work so well together and against each other at the same time. I am talking about the mayor and Rattlesnake Jake from Rango. Such an obscure movie that has Johnny Depp and the actor who played Davy Jones, who plays Rattlesnake Jake. Like, it's just great contrast with these characters. For those of you who've never seen Rango, definitely watch it. Watch it with your kids, because it's a great movie that kind of showcases some mature subject matter for the kids, but it's in a animated style way, and it's done beautifully. I'm talking about the movies too much, but I gotta get to it to get to the villains. The mayor is one of those surprise villains, or, I mean, it's kind of obvious at the same time. Basically, during a part of the movie, he talks about how he's learned from the giants, which is basically humans, in which he says he's learned from them. And in that way, his entire town is this westernish town where there's barely any water, and water is basically currency because they use it to feed their crops and to, survive. The mayor found the tap that runs the water system, so he shut it off in order to make people sell their land to him so he can demolish the town and to build basically Okay, so for retrospect, they're in the they're in the Nevada desert, and they're right by Las Vegas. So he's basically building that kind of town for himself. I think it's never fully explained. Not that much. And he also has his goons commit murder of the banker in order to dump all the remaining water into the town, into the desert. And then near the third act of the movie, we get Rattlesnake Jake, the Grim Reaper, who's an outlaw, and he's just so badass. Hearing Davy Jones' voice come out of this rattlesnake with a Gatling gun for a rattletail is one of the most sickest things I've ever experienced when I was younger, and I love every single minute of it. The fact that Rattlesnake Jake doesn't BS anything and absolutely exposes Rango for the fraud he is, it's just a great moment. And then the duel between him and Rango, it just comes full circle, where Rango was the fraud in the beginning, but now he's manned up and is about to take responsibility. The one scene when he spends all of his bullets at the bats and he's out and Rango pulls his gun on him, Jake just says, "You don't got the nerve to pull the trigger," basically. And he just looks in his eyes in Rango's eyes, and we see him scared a little bit. And then right at the end of the movie, Jake sees Rango as the legend he built himself to be. Like, even though Rango was BSing for a majority of the movie, it's at this one moment, right when the mayor's about to get his comeuppance, that Jake sees what he said, and it's true, technically, and tips his hat to him, showing a amount of respect towards Rango as a fellow outlaw. And I do love it how he just drags the mayor away and his fate is completely left up to the audience. In a movie like this, with two great villains, one is a corrupt official who's trying to harm his citizens in order for his own personal gain, to a legendary outlaw that we hear about, but we don't necessarily see until like the last third of the movie. These are two villains that work so well together in this one movie, and it's great. We get a 2-for-1 special with this, and I gotta say, I love it. All right, next up. Well, we're finally at DreamWorks for once, and this one is one of my personal favorites from a movie that, God, I am so sick and tired of the artwork of this movie. From Rise of the Guardians, we got Pitch Black, the Boogeyman, who is a fun villain also. I love his design, how he's all in black attire and is just a little hints of gray on his skin with his eyes that glow. He's basically a villain where he wants to be known by the children because everyone knows the Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, and all that. But he keeps fading away into existence. And I love his rivalry with the Sandman, considering he's supposed to bring good dreams and Pitch is supposed to do bad dreams. And I do love his little scheme. It's perfect to make people not believe in the Guardians, to basically ruin Easter but make it Jack Frost's fault. I love villains like this where they make themselves known but they don't fully actively interfere with the hero's goals or the plan. He does it in the shadows by making someone else take the blame. And I do love his confrontations with Jack. It is just perfect. And I love his ability to turn Sandman's dreams into these nightmare horses. It could have been, it could have been a little bit better to make them a little bit more unique, like having them be like different animals, but having them be like nightmare steeds, it works 100% of the time, and it's just a gorgeous animation. And the scene with the staff, it's a real emotional moment. And also, having Jude Law who voices Pitch Black in Rise of the Guardians?
I found this on the web.
Yep, Jude Law. I just wanted to double check. I always hate it when I hear a voice and I think it's someone else. Overall. But overall, again, Pitch Black is a great villain. He doesn't have the most screen time compared to some of the other villains in the movie. But at the same time, he's definitely a favorite of anyone who loves DreamWorks. It's an underrated classic with fan art that keeps shipping Frost with Elsa. I'm not going to get over that. And at the same time, Pitch is just a villain who wants to be noticed, which is kind of weird, to be honest. But at the same time, great villain, great movie, and a villain who will definitely be haunting our nightmares. Or in some cases, fantasies. Another obscure one that I love with a passion. Okay, technically, this is a little bit cheating. This may be my one cheat in the video. These are technically computer-generated characters, but the movie, like Space Jam, the movie is live action. But these villains are animated, so I'm counting it, because it's the same thing with Space Jam. Nostalgic people, salute the Commando Elite. Everything else is just a toy. Small Soldiers was an absolute gem for me growing up. And the Commando Elite is definitely a villain group that is absolutely perfect for this kind of movie. Because in the original of the story, the monsters of the movie, the Gorgonites, were supposed to be learning toys, like to teach kids stuff. But then when the Commando Elite toys were shown, they had to group them together, having the Commando Elite be the heroes, the military, and they having to hunt the Gorgonites, who are timid and harmless. Okay, except for Insaniac. Except for Insaniac. Yeah, he's his own little bag of trouble. But the Commando Elite are great villains. And I do love how they're based on G.I. Joes, basically, like old army toys. And a big thing for me is that, looking back on all the old days, that army toys back in the day were kind of similar, because it was just a soldier with a couple weapon differences, but the Commando Elite have their own unique attributes in design, and it kind of shows you basically what position they are. Chip Hazard having the army vest and the crew cut haircut shows you that he's basically the leader of the group. Nick Nitro with his bashed in teeth and all the explosives on him shows that he's demolition. Butch Meathook, sniper. You can tell because he's the only one who actually carries a rifle with him. You can obviously tell that. Brick Bazooka with his ripped shirt and bulging muscles and his slack jaw. You can tell he's in the artillery. Link Static, obviously with the goggles and the communication microphone, you can tell that he's the intelligence and communications expert. And Kip Killigan, Special Forces. Not real much with Kip, but at the same time, every single member of the Commando Elite has their own personalities and their own little... I mean, just by looking at each character, you can basically tell what their position is. And I did love them throughout the movie. They had more screen time than the Gorgonites, technically. And every scene with them is just hilarious. And somewhat action-packed, like seeing toys fight each other, you get exactly what you were expecting. Except for that one scene that everyone agrees was terrifying. Yeah. But you know what? Commando Elite absolutely earns their spot on this list, halfway point, because they're nostalgic, they're creative, they're funny, and like I said, everything else is just a toy. DreamWorks really can't go wrong half the time. I tried of who to put on this list from Kung Fu Panda. Honestly, like every single villain from the movies is perfect. There is no, like, okay, aside from the series, which was meh for me, and I haven't seen the new show, which I'm not going to. Every single villain from all three movies should be on this list. But because I'm doing one only, I have to go with Lord Shen from number 2. And I saw this movie in theaters years ago with my Kung Fu group, which was awesome. And being voiced by legend Gary Oldman, who, let's be honest, when it comes to animated movies, he doesn't really get the best roles. Yeah, I'm looking at you. But in number 2, he redeemed himself. He fully redeemed, and Lord Shen is a badass villain. And one of the few villains in a kid's movie to actually have a death toll. Whereas in some movie, in a lot of DreamWorks movies, we do get deaths during the movie, or like it's mentioned, but we actually get to see a death, multiple deaths in Kung Fu Panda. From number 1, the prison scene, and number 2, holy hell! Basically, Lord Shen was a prince in a kingdom who saw the devastation that fireworks can do and created weaponry. Now, he's not a villain that utilizes only weapons to do his bidding. He's a great martial artist who uses, like, feather-sized blades in order to fight. And he's even got those steel gaps that they would put on roosters in order for cockfighting. But they use it for his nails to inflict major damage. And his whole goal... And he was told that black and white will be his downfall, so... Him and his wolf soldiers lay waste to a village of pandas in the nation, and yeah, I'm not kidding. That's literally what happens in the first bit of the movie. And then his parents see with horror of what he's done, and they exile him. And after his parents die, he returns with his cannons and again lays waste to one of the Grand Masters of martial arts. So in the first bit of the movie, before we even get to Poe and the Fearsome Five, we have a death total already. Holy crap. And I love how his insignia, which is a peacock eye, like on one of the feathers, is on his minion's shoulder pads, and that kind of brings PTSD to Poe. And even how menacing he is, there is still humor in this character. Like when he's waiting for the Dragon Warrior to be brought up to him, he's doing his little speech, and there's no one there. And then when he's doing the same thing by placing his cannon he's doing his speech and the cannon's off a little bit, so he tells his gorilla men to move it a little bit more to the left. So even though he's a menacing villain, and menacing doesn't even describe Shen most of the time, it's absolutely enjoyable, there's still a bout of humor within small scenes. Like, they could have fully gone menacing, like a menacing-ish character, but have him be completely hilarious all the time. They could have gone that route, but at the same time, they restrained it at so much, but it works. And every point where the humor is, and he basically tells Po that he's the reason he has no family and he doesn't know where he's come from. And unlike Tai Lung, who is more Shifu's villain, Shen is definitely Po's arch enemy, and it's done so well. And even the final confrontation, we get one of the best confrontation and lines in the movie, where Shen is defeated and he tells Po, like, how could you find inner peace when I ruined your life? And hearing Jack Black as a bumbling panda say these well-done lines is more than enough to be so high with a villain like this, saying that scars heal. And he says that scars don't heal, wounds heal. But the point is, you gotta let go. Even during a middle part of the movie, the fortune teller basically tells him, like, your past hasn't changed. Your path hasn't changed. Everything you did, it didn't matter. You basically thrusted your own future into what was already going to happen. And he's lost himself. Shen was the point of no return for Shen. He has already gone on that part, and he's not sorry for anything he's done. Unlike Tai Lung, where Tai Lung was made a villain because of his pride and everything about Shifu and Oogway, and Kai being a great villain because of Oogway as well. Shen was a villain because of his own actions, not because of anyone else, not because of any outside source. And that's what makes Shen a great villain. I've talked a lot about this, but when it's a great villain like this, how can I not? And we're still stuck on DreamWorks right now. Okay. Let's see. Superhero. Jonah Hill. Do these two things look like they go together? No. Because that's what we got in one of my favorite DreamWorks movies, Megamind, and what we got with Hal. I'm trying to think of a punchline for that, but there isn't any. And where he becomes Titan. Basically, he's the bumbling, nerdy cameraman with best girl, Roxanne Ritchie, who kind of likes her and accidentally becomes the catalyst to being Megamind's new arch enemy in order to reclaim the glory he misses now that Metro Man is gone. I love this villain because he's a bumbling nit, but he's been given superpowers by accident. And at the same time, the fact that Megamind, under disguises, trains him to use his power so he gets a perfect fight. It's one of those things where he becomes the instrument of his own destruction, basically. Because Titan is a clear example of how a superhero can easily become a villain if they don't have the right morality And I do love it. And people make quotes about him all the time, and I love it. The whole thing with Titan, now that he believes, now that he's a superhero, he can get the girl, it's not happening. So, the one thing I love is that even though he has the same abilities as Metro Man, Megamind is very shocked when he decides to become a villain. And it shows. Even after defeating Megamind, he decides to take over the city as a dictator. And not only that, it works. This is a superhero movie trope done right. Because how many times do we get the hero, the guy who gets all the powers, and he becomes a villain? Not immediately, but it's because he's basically a teenager who didn't get the girl he wanted, so he decided to become a monster. And it's done very well. I do love the villain Titan. I do love the fights with him and Megamind. I do love the climax of the movie. It's done so well. It's one of my personal favorite movies, and that's why it is a smidge higher than Shen. But the remaining 4 definitely outbeat him. So, Titan, what a villain. Now go back to Lockup. Okay, okay, for retrospect, I watched this movie when I was a kid in school. And now as I've gotten older and I watched it at home. Okay, I know I'm babbling a little bit, but I can't think of the words of how to say this villain. Basically proved that Tim Curry can make a kids movie and still sound sexual while singing. I am, of course, talking about Hexus from Fern Gully. Seriously, Pollution, Tim Curry, sexy voice song. Literally, that's the character, and I love it. Hexus is a god of pollution who was imprisoned within a tree. Why does this sound like a Power Ranger villain? And then, by accident, the idiot of the movie, the human idiot, not the regular idiots. Yeah, them. Accidentally marks the tree to be cut open. And that gives us Hexus as this oozing monster as he goes inside of the depth of the deforestation machine and basically encourages the workers to destroy more of the forest as he absorbs the pollution from the machine in another great villain song, Toxic Love. And again, Tim Curry can make singing about deforestation, pollution, and destruction. He can make it sound sexy. What the fuck? What the actual fuck? And then we get him from his sludge form to his skeleton to his poisonous cloud form. It's an absolute joy, and I love the character because when it comes to playing villains, Tim Curry is an absolute rock star. And again, doing another song with that voice, it's just perfect. And seeing the behind the scenes of him singing in the recording booth, it adds an amount of joy to me about the song. And sadly, he has the same issue with Pitch Black and Titan, that they're not in the majority of the movie. Like, they're in bits and pieces. And the way they defeat him is basically they imprison him again. Like, I don't know if they have a way to fully kill him. But overall, great villain, great villain song, great voice actor, great plot, because he's all about just pollution and death and destruction. I love it. And all again, Hexus is a great villain, but definitely teaches kids the dangers of pollution. Be careful, kids. If you don't clean up your trash, a sexy gas monster is going to be singing at your birthday party. That is a weird sentence. Okay, number 3 goes to a villain who is 100% great. I loved him. And again, another movie I had to watch in class in school. Basically health class and science class. And I know we got over the whole pandemic thing, but I feel right putting a virus so high on my villain list. I am talking about the Red Death, Thrax, from Osmosis Jones. God, this is a great villain. Deep after eating a hard-boiled egg that was in the mouth, and then crap of a monkey. I'm sorry, I needed a minute. That made me feel a little ill. Bill Murray, inside of Bill Murray, we get a villain voiced by Lawrence Fishburne, another great voice actor, another great actor in general, who I love with a passion. From CSI, from 21 to Blackish a little bit, and to all of his other roles where he just plays an absolute badass. And this is no different. Thrax is an immutable virus whose red claw can destroy antibodies. And just, he looks like a monstrous gangster, and I love it. They could have gone so easily with having being just this ravenous virus that had no voice, and have it be something simple. But no, they went with a great character design. And the way he just calmly hums his tune as he goes throughout his plan, he's so nonchalantly evil, and I love it. Right from the get-go, he goes to a spot where some of the germs in the body go, and he makes it a point of what he's going to do. And again, we get a death. We get 2 deaths right off the bat when he enters. And I love it. Basically, he says that after the germ boss calls him the Ebola virus, which back in the day was really bad, he just sees that as an insult, considering he thinks himself worse than Ebola. And his whole scheme is brilliant. They really did a good way of making the human body like a crime show. Except in the TV series when they do it more kiddish. And mostly because they're no longer in the body of Bill Murray. They're in the body of a teenager. Ozzy and Drix, okay, but I prefer the movie. Basically, he gets a whole bunch of germs together in order to enact his plan. By first making it seem like he's the common cold, which hides his real symptom. What he's really out to do. He causes a bunch of issues throughout Frank's body, and I mean, it's handled, but that's just step 1 of his plan. It is revealed that he's a virus that he's been around. He always carries this bracelet kind of around his arm that he swings other times, and there's little beads in it that are from all the people he's murdered, technically. He goes through 3 of them and says from a little girl who didn't like to wash her hands and how long it took him to kill. I'll put up the counter right here. He brags about all the 3 of his victims that he's killed and how long it took him to do it. saying that he gets better as he goes, but he's never broken the record, which is why he plans to take Frank down in 20. Let me see. 1 second, guys. I just want to double check this. Also, I do love how his name is based around anthrax, which is, again, another deadly Okay, here we go. I know I'm using this a lot, but I need to have the exact amount. So, 1, he killed a little girl within 3 weeks. And then the next one, 6 days. And then the next one, 72 hours. So, again, he wants to be the most deadly virus in history so that the medical books in the human world will have chapters about him. So basically, he's going to take Frank out in 48 hours. And I do love the whole idea of his plan. It works. He's using basic symptoms like a common cold or something else in order to indicate like it's something different, because that's how a lot of diseases and viruses act. It acts like one thing, but there are certain things that will discern it to being what it actually is. And that's basically, like, this is a villain that would give House a run for his money. I'm not joking. And I do love it. And also it's great because, considering the fact, the reason it took him, I think it took him so long to kill the 3 that he talked about, is their immune systems were perfect. Well, not perfect, because one was a young girl, one was an older person, one was in the middle. So, again, their body's defense systems could have been fighting him off better, which is why it took him longer to kill them. But because Frank's body is basically terrible, considering a white blood cell count is mare, and he's not doing anything about it, it's easier for him to get into the control room where he takes, which is part of the brain where he takes the bead, and that sends the body into system shutdown, which kills them. Again, I babbled a lot about this, but I gotta get to the main points. Thrax is a great animated villain. He's so maniacal. At first he acts all calm and cool with his plan, but the minute something goes wrong, he becomes a real monster, and I love it. I do love every section of Thrax's plan, to his design, to his voice actor. He's a virus that knows how to be a killer villain. But now we get to the top 2. Okay. I was so hell-bent on putting this villain at the number 1 spot, but the number 1 spot did a couple things a little bit better. But I love this villain with a passion. And the fact that I only know him from the beginning of the year, and I love this villain. Well, what's wrong? Lives flashing before your eyes? I am talking about the big bad bounty hunter, aka Death, from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. When I first watched this movie, I saw this movie right when I got back from Disney last year, right in January, the week we got back. I went to go see this movie because I had to see it in theaters, and it's a glorious villain. I love every little bit about this villain. I love every little bit about the movie. I'm going a little nuts. So I cosplayed Death at a local convention of mine earlier last week, and And everything about him is perfect. He's not a villain for evil's sake. He's a villain that, like Rattlesnake Jake, he's doing his job, but he has a little bit of a vendetta. After Puss in Boots is on his last life, Death comes to see him and basically shows Puss he's not invincible. And he's peppered here and there throughout the movie. Like, he's not the main threat, but he's definitely a chasing, looming threat. And I love it. Until we get to the big reveal, I honestly thought he was just going to be a bounty hunter who, after hearing that Puss is on his last life, it's going to be a lot more interesting to see a bounty hunter try to claim Puss's last life, to be notarized as the one who finally took down the immortal Puss in Boots. I thought that's how they were going to do it. Like, have this bounty hunter strike fear into Puss by injuring him, and now that he's on his last life, he's terrified. That's 100% where I thought this whole thing was going to go. And it went right over my head. It went right over my freaking head. But it shouldn't have, considering the two other times we see him put 2 gold coins on his eyes when he's doing this to Puss, which in some cultures, putting coins on the eyes is a symbol of they're dead. And then when he's showcases again, we see the skull around him. Again, I just thought that was in Puss's head. But the reveal that he's literal death, and I do love that they emphasize that they don't mean it metaphorically, rhetorically, poetically, or theoretically. He's death straight up. And I love it. Not just because he's a wolf, because I'm a big wolf guy. I do love his reasoning for going after Puss. The fact that as it was showcased, Puss was very carefree with his lives. When he lost one, he didn't care because he had more, and he just felt like nothing could take him down. And that's why Death is after him, because he never valued his lives. And he just threw them away like rich people throwing away hundreds of dollars because they think they've got more. But the more you lose, again, the less you're going to have, and the more the fear strikes you. And every time him and Puss are around each other, they're great scenes. I mean, yeah, Jack Horner is a great villain too, and Goldilocks is more of the sympathetic, not really a villain, but just someone who wants something and is doing bad things to get them. But Death is better than both these two in the movie, because the simple fact is that he's a villain who is the ultimate villain of all, Death. But at the same time, he's doing his job. But okay, he's taking a little bit upon himself to take out Puss, because he's basically laughed at Death's face so long. And yeah, that's a big insult. And I do love his 2 sickle weapons instead of him having a Reaper scythe. They did that, and it just adds to the fight scenes, the fluid motion of it, the action. And it's at the end when Puss finally stops wanting more lives and fights for the life he's got left. And that's where Death just acknowledges that he's not the same guy he was before. And it's only until they'll meet each other as friends in the end. Good God. So yeah, I mentioned that I was going to put Death at number 1 because he was my favorite throughout the year. There hasn't been a villain this year that has topped him. But there is one villain who tops all 12 of these villains. And for good measure. We've had villains who've had death counts, who've been malicious, who have been evil, who have been manipulative, who's been downright hilarious, some of them. But this villain, you know what? Just go to number 1. Every time that music plays, I always get a shiver down my spine. This villain is everything the other villains are, except for Death and Pitch Black and Rattlesnake Jake, and the Monstars and Swaghammer. They are somewhat funny as well as villainous, but this villain is terrifying to no end. And it's kind of symbolic how sometimes the nicest looking things can be the most dangerous. I am talking about the beldam from Coraline. This movie had me as when I first watched it, and that was like, man, I was a teenager, I think. I'm pretty sure. When was Coraline released?
Coraline.
Okay, 2009. I was in high school, but I didn't watch it until like a good couple years after, where it was on YTV during Halloween season. And I honestly thought this was a Tim Burton movie. Full disclosure, I thought this was a movie by the master of claymation. And to my surprise, it wasn't. But it had all the elements there. A dark and drabby, grayish real life world, and a colorful but dark other world. It terrified me. I know I'm pausing a lot, but this villain is fantastic because of her. She's basically like a supernatural monster that feeds on the life force of children. And the way she does it is, I want to say it's glorious. Spying on the kids who live in the building and seeing that their lives aren't perfect. Giving them a world of fantasy, of wonderment, and for them to stay with her and to be their mother. But it's to no avail. She ends up devouring the children, and holy crap, that scared the out of me. Like, the movie still scares me, but it's still one of my favorite movies. Because, with the exception of like one villain here who has killed a child, technically, it's terrifying. The beldam she acts like she wants to love someone but she's incapable. It's terrifying. And then when the facade is fully dropped, and then she reveals her true-ish form, it's terrifying. And then every little thing in the world she creates goes from whimsical and fun to terrifyingly creepy. And then her spider-ish, her arachnid-like form with her metal hands. Okay, all honesty, they do show us the hands, the metal hands, right at the beginning of the movie, but that completely went over my head when I was younger. And at the same time, her whole form is just like metallic but insect-like, showing that she can be anything to fit the current time. And all the denizens of her world are basically just puppets to use at her control in order to make the kids feel welcome and cared for. It's basically a spider luring flies to her web with scents and smells, and that perfectly aspects when she destroys the world around her for that spider web aesthetic in the living room. It basically says once you enter her world, you're trapped. But here's the thing that the beldam does that makes her a great manipulator. She lets her prey go back until she decides to keep them. That lets them see how amazing her world is, and how terrible the real world is, allowing the kids to make the decision to go back to her and have her gain their trust more. That is psychological warfare of the highest caliber, especially for a kids movie. And everything from the Taffy sisters to the Mantis to the rat circus, just terrifying. Everything is scary and terrifying to the perfect extent. And right when we think the movie's done and the metal hand comes back, just the metal hand itself trying to get the key back and hurt Coraline. The climax of the movie is by far one of the most stressful moments of a movie. And knowing that the actual book is a lot fucking darker. I don't know why I'm censoring myself, considering I swore a lot. I'm trying to censor myself a good majority. Considering that the real book, the ending is more heart-wrenching and awful. I'm glad they didn't do that in the actual movie. I'm glad we got to see a good ending. And, oh my God. I'm going to have to watch a lot of good stuff before I go to bed. Because even now, I still get nightmares from this movie once in a while. The beldam is manipulative. Psychological torment is used in what she creates for the kids. Her victim count is only 3, but when you consider the fact that they're children, it really sinks in. And the fact that she's just a monstrous manipulator that, God, the beldam is such a great animated villain, and I don't think I've seen anything to top her in years. Like, this movie came out in 2009. Which means for over 15 years now, there hasn't been a villain to top what the beldam has done. And that's why she is my number one non-Disney animated villain. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed the list. What are some non-Disney animated villains that you guys like? If you guys feel free, like, comment, subscribe down below. Comment on some of your favorite non-Disney animated villains. And what'd you think of my list? Well, Villain Month has just begun. And join me next week where we're going back to one of my favorite card games where victory is a snap away. This is Gamer K, logging out.